Hello world, I'm a shorter than average girl from down under and it's getting spooky around here. Yes, I know that for where I am, Halloween is well and truly over, but around the world it's still going right now. And I am not one to pass the opportunity to talk about some juicy horror. Now, the horror genre, you either love it or you hate it. I love it. But essentially, all horror stories focus on one or several human cardinal fears by either exaggerating it or using effects to highlight how the human perception builds up something and makes it grow more than it actually is. And this makes the horror genre so ideal to analyze because it holds so much deeper meaning about what makes us human, even if it has ghosts and aliens and monsters and stuff. But of course, given that this channel predominantly focuses on kids' movies at the moment, we're not going to wander too far into the horror genre and focus on basically the first horror movie that I ever watched, Coraline. Oh boy, honestly, I don't know how I watched this when I was 9 years old. It's terrifying, and this is coming from someone who's gone into the Conjuring universe, The Ring, and all these other horror franchises. Just like many other horrors, this movie is packed with symbolism, foreshadowing, and folklore as it tells the story of a girl who learns to become content with her new life. Now, I know that people have analyzed this movie to death. There are millions of Coraline conspiracy theorists and lovers out there, and so, this content can get overwhelming. But this video is going to be an introduction to what horror analysis could look like to those who aren't really in the horror audience. So we're not going to go down any of the rabbit holes of the superstitions and legends which are incorporated into the movie, but instead we're going to focus on the human elements which are explored in the story. So if you're only here for the movie review, then you can click to the time shown on the screen right now or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk stories. So this movie is based on a novella of the same name written by Neil Gaiman. It tells the story of an 11-year-old only child named Coraline Jones as her parents whisk her up to a new town, a new home, and it's about how she spends the last 3 weeks of her summer holiday trying to accept the move and her now new lifestyle. Now, there are quite a few differences between the book and the movie. However, the overall storyline is practically the same. So the old house that they move into is divided into 4 flats. In the movie, it's split into 3, or at least that's how I perceived it. The tenants living downstairs are Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, 2 retired performers. In the book, they had worked for the circus, and in the movie, they're more burlesque dancers. The upstairs tenant is Mr. Bobo, who claims that he is training a mouse circus, and in the movie, his name is Mr. Babinski, and he is Russian. As for the last flat, no one lives there. Now, during this time, her parents are just overly consumed with their work. They basically don't have any time to spend with her, so she uses up her spare time to go exploring around the grounds, where she discovers an old tennis court and abandoned well, as well as spending time with Miss Spink and Miss Forcible. However, on a rainy day, she couldn't go outside to explore, so she decides to pester her parents, and this is when she discovers a locked door in the drawing room. After convincing her mum to open the door for her, she finds that on the other side There's just a brick wall, probably put there to separate this apartment from the empty one on the other side. The next day, she goes to visit Miss Spinks and Miss Forcible, and that's when Mr. Bobo comes to her and tells her that the mice have a message for her, not to go through the door. And to add to that, Mrs. Spinks and Mrs. Forcible decide to read Caroline's tea leaves, which they tell her that
Caroline, 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 you are in terrible danger.
as a consequence of this reading, Mrs. Spinks gives Caroline an adder stone. But we'll get back to that later. The next day, Caroline and her mother go shopping for her school uniform, and that's when she sees these green gloves that she really wants. However, her mum doesn't get them for her. This makes Caroline upset, and so when they get home and her mum has to go out to get groceries for lunch, Caroline decides to stay in the flat by herself. As her parents are both out, she decides to try her luck with that bricked up door, only to find that the bricks are gone and that there is a long corridor. She finds that the entire flat is identical to her new house. The only difference? Well, the tenants, the lady that she sees on the other side, kind of looks like her mum, but she's taller, thinner, her fingers are longer than usual, her teeth are longer than usual, and she has buttons for eyes. And this lady calls herself Caroline's other mother, and she tells her to go and call her father for lunch. When she goes into her father's study, she finds someone that also looks like her dad, slightly not, with buttons for eyes. Now, her other parents give Caroline the attention that she so desperately desires, and the cooking, well, it was good compared to her father's experimental recipes. Not only that, her new room looks different. Plus, these circus mice are, well, a real circus. The other Mr. Bobo invites her to his apartment. She declines, saying that she is gonna go out exploring. When she's outside, she meets the cat. There is a black cat in her real world that just hangs around the ground, so she just assumed that this was the other black cat off the grounds. But no.
I'm not the other anything. I'm me.
And so we discover that this black cat is the same one from the real world. He just has the ability to walk between these two places. When he's in the other world, he can talk. When he's in the real world, he's just a normal cat. And through his sarcasm, he does warn Caroline that there is something fishy about this place. Caroline decides to visit her neighbors. When Caroline learns that this performance is just going to go on forever, she decides to leave. I mean, who wouldn't? And that's where she meets her parents waiting for her at the front door. They tell her that if she likes it here, she can stay forever. The only thing she needed to do was sew buttons into her eyes. Now, of course, this creeps Caroline out, and she just wants to get home at this point. So they let her. When she makes it to the real world, she's all alone. Caroline is absolutely devastated and she sleeps in her parents' bed. That's when the cat comes and wakes her up. He leads her to the mirror at the end of the hallway. In the mirror, she sees her parents. Now, Caroline, being a child and having parents that have taught her what she should do in an emergency, calls the police. But of course, the police don't believe her and they don't do anything about a girl being home alone all day? Yeah, smart one. But she knows that the other mother had kidnapped her parents. So now she's got to be brave and go back. While she's preparing herself, she tells the cat a story about her father. In their old home, there was a wasteland at the back, and Caroline used to always want to go and explore it. However, because it contains all this junk, her parents were afraid that she could get seriously hurt. But after insisting and insisting again and again, her father decided that he would go out with her and that they can go exploring together. Unfortunately, they ended up interrupting a wasp nest, and so to make sure that Caroline is safe, her father tells her to go and hide behind the hill while he just stands there and takes all the brunt of the stings. Amongst the chaos, his glasses fell off, so now he had to go back and grab them. Coraline tells us that her father said that the first act of him standing still and taking all the stings while she hid, that wasn't scary. That wasn't brave. However, when he did go back to grab his glasses, that's when he was brave, because he was terrified of going back. And so, just as her father, Caroline had to be brave to go back to the other world and save her parents. When she goes back, her other mother tries to convince her that her parents had abandoned her, and she goes as far as to try and prove it to Caroline by taking her to the mirror and showing her a scene that her parents had packed up their luggage and just left the front door. But Caroline wasn't gonna have it. While the other mother and father slept, the cat told her that the other mother likes playing games. Now, at the moment, Caroline doesn't take this into account, but it becomes important later. As her and the cat were walking around on the outside, she realizes that...
Huh? But how can you walk away from something and still come back to it?
The cat says that's because that's all the other mother had built. She notices that her other father is acting very, very strange. As he's talking to her, he's trying to shut himself up at the same time, as if he's saying stuff that she shouldn't know. She leaves him and then goes to the fireplace, where she sees the only difference between this apartment and her own, a snow globe. But anyways, when the other mother does end up waking up, the other mother gets upset with how ungrateful Caroline is being and chucks her into the mirror. Behind the mirror, Caroline meets three ghost children, the three previous victims of the Beldam. They tell her that she stole their heart, then she stole their soul, and then took their lives away, eventually leaving them there behind the mirror and forgetting about them in the dark. They beg Caroline to help free them. All she needed to do was find their souls. Eventually, the other mother decides to take Coraline out of her timeout, and this is where Coraline proposes they play a game. A exploring game, where Coraline will have to find the soul of the three ghost children as well as her parents. Of course, the Beldam agrees to this. So Coraline goes on an adventure to find the three souls of the ghost children and her parents. And lucky for her, the Adder Stone comes in handy to help her. When she looks through it, the entire world looks grey except for the souls. She manages to find all three of them. One in her bedroom, one in Miss Spinks and Miss Forcible's apartment, and one with Mr. Bobo. Through this entire adventure as well, she ends up making it to the other apartment, where she finds the remains of her other father. After having betrayed the other mother by what he said to Coraline, she had basically tortured him and turned him into this hideous monster. Caroline felt sorry for him, and he was trying to fight the Beldam so hard, telling Caroline that she really wants me to hurt you. Caroline encourages him to be brave, that he can control it, but unfortunately he can't, and he does attack Caroline. But of course, Caroline manages to play smarter and evade him. She basically has found all three of the souls. Now all she has to do was find her parents, which she had already done so. But the Beldam wasn't going to let her win and get away with it. Besides, she had locked the door to get to her real world. She was going to have to play it smart. As Caroline was confronting the Beldam, she tells her that her parents are behind the door. Beldam, thinking that she's won, unlocks the door to reveal that her parents are in fact not there. That's when Coraline throws the cat at the Beldam, takes the snow globe, and escapes. Barely. When she gets back, her parents are there. And that night, she sees those three ghost children. They tell her that she still doesn't have peace yet. The Beldam's hand is still in her world, and she wants that key. If she gets that key, yeah. Caroline decides that she needs to get rid of this key. So she sets up a picnic on top of the old well and waits for the Beldam's hand to arrive. As it tries to snatch the key, it falls into the well and she closes the lid. And that's the end of that. Overall, the story is very similar between the book and the movie, but there are quite a few differences, as in the movie adds in a lot more. The simplicity of the story allows for additions to be made without subtracting from its original value. And that's what makes Coraline such a beautiful narrative. Now, a difference that we will see at the beginning of the movie is the existence of the character of YB. There is no YB in the book. But in the movie, he plays a very significant role, being portrayed as a character who is very similar to Caroline, but showing her attitude towards him and how it evolves. Another thing that the movie adds to emphasize the theme of Caroline's growth is all the gardening motifs. Now, her parents having a gardening catalog is the same as in the book, but the existence of the garden and the whole act of caring and looking after a living being, such as a plant, versus how her parents kind of neglect her, is meant to allow us as an audience to think about the way that Caroline is being raised. Other major differences is, of course, the ending of The Other Father, and then a lot of the little details that are included in the movie. Now, I must say the movie does an excellent job of reflecting Caroline's journey through its visuals. In the beginning of the movie, everything is so dull and gray, with the exception of Caroline, who stands out against the location. And this is intentional. It's meant to show us, as an audience, that Caroline doesn't feel like she fits in, and that she thinks this new life of hers is
Painfully boring.
and this is in complete contrast to the other world, which is full of color and excitement. And this is to allow us to understand the contrast that Caroline sees between these two places. One was so exciting for her, whereas the other was not. But at the end of it all, everything switches. The other world becomes dull and gray, whereas her real life becomes more colorful. And this represents Caroline's shift in perspective, the change and growth that she has undergone. The movie makers actually do such a great job in incorporating things which allow us to understand Caroline's development, like what she wears, the references to witchcraft and different superstitions. However, it's not going to be in the scope of this video where we discuss all these minute but extraordinary details. Instead, we're going to focus on the story. Now, Caroline's story is basically a coming of age story, like the so many coming of age stories that we've analyzed on this channel. But Caroline's one is slightly different. There is no prophecy for Coraline to follow, and she doesn't start off with some kind of trauma or disadvantage which propels her into the hero's shoes. Instead, we're starting off with an ordinary girl, ordinary life, who ends up putting herself through curiosity in danger. It's only after she puts herself in danger which she grows from being an ordinary person into a hero, which makes Caroline's story more relatable to us, ordinary folk. Now, at the start of the book and the movie, there are slight differences to what Caroline's life looked like. However, the way that she perceived it was very similar. She didn't like it. In the movie, there is an extra emphasis on the fact that she never really wanted to move. She felt like this was a decision outside of her hand. She felt alone in this move, given that her parents weren't there to give her the attention or quote unquote support that she needed at the start to feel like she is welcome in her new life. Whereas in the book, you don't really get that impression. Her parents are spending time with her, they're loving, they're calling her darling and that kind of thing. But she's just a curious young girl. She wants to go exploring. And given that she doesn't really know anyone, she had just moved, that's what's making her feel alone and not really wanted. The Beldam takes that negative emotion, given that the negative emotion exists in both these circumstances, and decides to start to spin her web to catch Coraline in it. A web of deceptive love. Now, the intentions of the Beldam with regards to why she does it isn't 100% clear. I mean, the cat says,
She wants something to love, I think. Something that isn't her.
and every time the other mother says to Caroline that she loves her, Caroline realizes that she really does, but not in the way that her parents would love her, but more of the way that a dragon would love his treasure. She was just a possession, another part of the Beldam's collection, something that will also soon be forgotten, just like the other ghost children. In addition, there are hints that the Beldam consumes her victims, not necessarily as in eat their bodies, but somehow take their soul. And again, this is hinted at when the cat says,
Or maybe she just loves something to eat.
and so she spins this web to capture her prey that she wants to consume. In addition, the movie has the Beldams spying on the kids through a doll that looks like them. The whole kind of opening scene where we're seeing her using thread and stitching also allows us to compare her with a spider who builds their nest out of silk. She also enjoys playing with her food, as the cat hints in the book. That may lead us to understand why the Beldam enjoys playing games with her victims. It's not just to lull them into a sense of security, but it's because she enjoys it too. So now looking at the Beldam and the cat side by side, we see that the Beldam represents Caroline's voice of temptation, whereas the cat her voice of reason. That voice of temptation will never force us to do something, but it will linger, understand our weaknesses, and try to get us to act in a particular way. Whereas our voice of reason, it will tell it to us, straight and blunt, whether it is good or bad. The Beldam basically tempts Caroline with all the things that she feels are missing in her life. And so the story serves as a cautionary tale about falling into temptation and how that could be used to lull someone into a sense of security, which is actually putting them into a further detriment in their life. Now, going back to Coraline. Coraline is dissatisfied with her current life. She doesn't feel like her parents understand her, want her, or even accept her the way that she is. But the truth of the matter is, it's not her parents' fault, but Caroline's perception of the way that they're treating her. She finds it boring. And this is something that the Beldam uses against her when she's trying to convince her that her parents had abandoned her because they got bored of her. Because that's what Coraline had done to them. She had gotten bored of her parents and therefore gone to the other world. In the book, she only goes once, so that's not so much a harping point, but if you combine the stories of the book and the movie, in the movie it does become a hopping point because she goes to the other world 3 times, using it as an escape from her reality. She blatantly compares her parents to the other parents to try and guilt trip them to paying more attention to her. So yes, she is the one who's bored of her parents, and yes, she is the one who abandoned them. And that's why the whole redemption arc of her going back to save them becomes so much more prevalent in the movie than it is in the book. But then that's where I also wish that the story about her father saving her from the wasps was added into the movie, because it would have added this entire additional dimension to her character to come to the realization that, damn, My parents were awesome. They weren't boring. They have actually given me all the skills that I need to be able to develop. It's a missed opportunity, but I'll let it slide. And at the other end of the adventure, Caroline appreciates her parents for who they are and realizes that they had appreciated her for all she was this entire time, but she was unable to perceive it. And we see this by the fact that her mother gives her the gloves, as she had promised.
Coraline, if things go well today, I promise I'll make it up.
And when the catalog is successful, as we see at the end of the movie, they do fulfill those promises and she can come to accept it, which means that Caroline has finally appreciated the world that is around her, being able to understand things not by the narrow view of her world, but perspectives of others. And that's why the world became more colorful. And this is where it gets us to the interesting detail about the small world. The Beldam doesn't build an entire world for Caroline, only the bits that she deems necessary. In this situation, Caroline was so self-centered. Everything was only from her perspective, her small world. And that's why when it came to it, she could walk around it super easily. It was only when she was searching for the souls of the three ghosts and her parents that she now needed to look further than her own world. However, because the Beldam only built this for her, that didn't exist. So what Caroline finally saw was how small her world was and the need for her to expand her perspective so that she could view the entire world, the one where others live. The movie adds an additional dimension when talking about the small world through the discussion of emotion. In the real world, there are so many emotions in play that Caroline sees: sadness, disgust, frustration, stress, things that Caroline wished weren't there because they were impeding on her entitlement for a happy life. So the Beldam uses this when constructing the other world. Everything needed to be happy. There was no place for any other emotion. And that's why when the Beldam
Yeah.
the Beldam created them as the best version that Caroline wanted.
I thought you'd like him more if he spoke a little less, so I fixed him.
Yeah.
The issue with the Beldam, however, is when she's constructing a friend for Caroline and a father for Caroline, she doesn't realize what a friend or a father actually means. And so when she builds them, both of them have sympathy for Caroline. And so both of them attempt to help her with dire consequences for themselves. The Beldam was only limited to what she understood from Coraline. She couldn't understand what genuine love meant, whether it be from a parental sense or a friendship sense. And it was because of this flaw that Caroline was able to figure things out and eventually escape in the movie. Poor other YB man.
Oh, maybe.
At the end of the day, Caroline goes through an experience which changes her perception of the world, being able to leave that selfish dome that she has put herself in to be able to understand the people around her and appreciate how everything intertwines together to build a world for her to live in. At the same time, being able to appreciate the value of others and therefore overcoming her own fears to be able to ensure that they are safe. And that's how Caroline grows up. It's a wonderful story. Not one that I would recommend for kids. Maybe the book, yes. I think although the monsters in the book are described to be more scary than they are in the animated film, I think the whole kind of stop motion thing really throws me off and makes it terrifying, honestly, terrifying. How scary something looks from a book depends on the child's imagination, and if a child hasn't seen too much things, that's going to be a very mild image of the monsters, whereas the movie has a very specific and distinct look to it, which scared me when I was 9. It's a terrifying theme. I think everyone is scared of having needles in their eyes and like spiders chomping at them, is being stuck in a web and everything. It goes through the cardinal fears of humanity, and that's why it is a very unsettling movie. Although very worth watching when you get a bit older. So like teens and stuff, oh, they're gonna be obsessed with it, I'm telling you. I kind of wish that I had watched it when I was a bit older so that I could understand it more and potentially grow to appreciate and love it more than I do now. Like as a grown woman who knows what the birth of Venus is, I would kind of understand why there is nudity, we could call it, in the claymation performance of Miss Forcible. Although, in all senses, nudity doesn't really have a place in kids' media in general. But I now know the inspiration for that nudity, and it's not just because. Other than that, there are some lewd references, which creates a stronger contrast between Caroline's actual mother and her other mother, because her actual mother stops her father from making lewd references, whereas the other mother plays it off and actually enjoys it. Just kind of highlighting to us how her actual mother is more protective over Caroline, and so more loving in that sense, whereas her other mother, again, this is the kind of movie where, of course, there are references hidden for adults, not just lewd references, but with regards to witchcraft and all that kind of stuff. So if kids are gonna watch it, I would recommend to have a parent along just in case. But other than that, it should be pretty good to go. So that was Coraline. I hope you liked that really kind of shortened analysis for this movie. It may not seem very short by the time, but trust me, compared to what is out there, this is super short and we barely touched the bare bones of the story. If you did like this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on next week's also themed movie analysis. But yeah, for now, be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.